welcome. My name's Kari Johnson, and I'm pretty excited to be here with you today with our panel of experts to talk about how blockchain can make the world a better place. I'm gonna jump to everyone and just, we'll run into the questions and all that, but let's start with some introductions. I am a staff writer at VentureBeat, and that's pretty much all you need to know.
Cool. Thanks. My name is Nicholas Hahn. I come from Singularity University, which is about cutting-edge technology, innovation, and solving the world's biggest challenges. I'm our VP of Impact, our faculty chair of Global Grand Challenges, and I'm launching a startup in the blockchain space that I'll talk about more on financing community development.
So hi, I'm Thea. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Diwala. Diwala is a seven-month-old startup that is focusing on verification of skills for the displaced community. We are now primarily set to pilot in Uganda, which is very exciting. And we were born out of the UN Women and Innovation Norway Hackathon. So it's an exciting story. We're the first time I met Ben.
So, hi everybody, my name is Bernard Kovac. I'm the head of the World Food Programme's Innovation Accelerator. So the World Food Programme is the UN's leading agency fighting hunger. So I'm looking for innovations and startups that can help us end hunger. And as part of that, we're also actually using blockchain technology right now, both for emergency assistance, but also supply chain and other things. I'm also co-founder of a startup called Share the Meal that's right now still the most successful crowdfunding fundraising app.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Siegel. I work on our social impact team at Consensus. So as a blockchain organization, how do we interact with, advise, research, do design with, help develop blockchain solutions for humanitarian organizations, NGOs, and social entrepreneurs?
So just, the first question, what are some of the exciting ways that you guys are seeing blockchain used for social impact?
Well, if I can start, so the one application that we're using is actually, the project is called Building Blocks. It's one of our finance officers, Human Haddad. He came up with an idea saying, why don't we use blockchain for cash-based transfers, so like vouchers for refugees and vulnerable people who actually need food and go into stores and buy it. And so we teamed him up with one of the entrepreneurs from the accelerator. Actually, we sent them to Singularity University for an induction in Silicon Valley for the first week when they started. And working with a startup, developed a system that's now essentially a virtual e-wallet on Ethereum blockchain. We did the first pilot after 6 months with 10,500 refugees in Jordan. And right now, as of a month ago, it's actually now expanded to cover 100,000 people in Jordan alone. At present, we're saving about 98% of the banking fees, but that's actually not why we're doing it. We're doing this so we can have better collaboration between different UN agencies, international NGOs, and governments, so you can actually have an exchange of data, and like people can actually also have access to the data going forward.
It's pretty awesome.
So I can talk a bit about what Diwala do because it's my pure passion, and it's about the displaced community and basically verifying the skills that they have, but also giving them the opportunity to grow assets with the initiatives that they want to build and do. That means that you basically switch the power hierarchy of how things have been done in the developing world for a long time, where you can give funding to actions they want to build forward. Specifically with if it's language training, if it's entrepreneurship. We're also looking especially at the informal economy in Uganda and how you can develop a blockchain-based tool to certify the certifications in the whole informal economy, because it's 50% of the GDP in Uganda.
And kind of doubling down on that, not like social impact in blockchain, it goes beyond necessarily humanitarian crises and aid delivery or refugees. Our Viant Spoke is currently working with the World Wildlife Fund to basically track the legality of tuna in Oceania and kind of create a better market for legal tuna fishing while simultaneously cutting down on the illegal fishing that's currently plaguing quite a bit of our ocean. So it's really interesting because what we've seen with blockchain is that it makes so much sense in so many different sectors, and kind of by nature is an impactful tool if it's developed and designed the right way. it's developed the wrong way, it's not very impactful. But it's been really interesting to see this kind of technology pop up with the ethos behind it. Like, hey, we are going to decentralize, we're going to distribute data, we're going to distribute wealth, funds, whatever it is, and make whatever we are doing currently more impactful. It must be said that that's not always how it works out, but I think if you look at the broader blockchain ecosystem, most of the technology you're seeing developed has that general like social impact ethos behind it.
So what are some of the factors you think need to be considered when applying blockchain in, developing parts of the world?
I'll comment on that. One thing we have to be very careful in this whole exciting new world of blockchain, and it applies to any cutting edge or exponential technology, is to not let the technology define the problem that it's going to solve. So we have a whole new influx of well-intentioned people and really frickin' brainy people in the blockchain space coming up with any number of potential solutions. To make this at all successful in the real world, there needs to be true partnership with people who understand the sectoral nature of the challenge, and then now, especially within this notion of the democratization of technology, meaning anybody anywhere can be a coder in Ethereum. We should be partnering with the very people who are the beneficiaries. That term beneficiary has to be relabeled as an empowered agent driving their own innovation. So this, I feel, is the real challenge, is to not let the solutions come from the Silicon Valleys of the world, but actually empower people who have been traditionally the recipients of this technology to actually be the drivers and agents of change themselves, because this is now possible like it's never been in the past.
So avoid heropreneurship, that idea of, I'm going to be the savior of the,
Absolutely right. It's we'll just relive the same mistakes we lived in the past, and actually what we should be looking for is to redesign our own mindsets, starting number one, and actually redesign the aid system so that, quote, the beneficiary is not the passive recipient, but a driver and agent of change themselves.
Empowerment.
I think it's really important that a lot of the companies that also come down, like you say, there's about co-creation that needs to be intrinsic in the process, but then there's also the collaboration factor with bringing local organizations as a part of the knowledge transfer from the start, and giving people the understanding of what data is as an essential part, because there's a lot of tech companies that goes down to developing countries now and taking advantage of the fact that people don't understand the information behind data and how valuable it is for companies today.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think I totally agree with what both of you have said. It's actually using the toolkit that's already out there. Think about design thinking, human-centered design, lean startup. I mean, it's all about understanding the user and working with them to actually improve your product. And in our World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, we actually, if people don't do it, we would force startups to do that, saying, okay, who is your user? Okay, go there, test your product, learn. What is your most critical assumption, and see whether it's actually true or not. And it's especially relevant when you use technology solutions like blockchain. We're saying, okay, does anybody actually care? Does it solve a problem of somebody? And if it does, brilliant. If there's some other solution that solves it, maybe with less technology, even better. And then you actually get to that. And we just need to also use the same essential toolbox that people use for building startups in Silicon Valley for users in developing countries, to that matter.
I just want to pick up on that because I think it's really important that you just don't go down and do something really short term as well. You can't be just dropped down. It needs to be a long-term strategy of how this development is happening. So you just don't go down, go back, and go forth, because that doesn't fuel any kind of trust, and that's what we need to go down with.
Yeah, and jumping in on the users or the beneficiaries at the end, and it's also really important to remember that being beneficiary facing, especially with emerging technologies, is not necessarily the safest thing to do. If you're looking to use the technology and you get the feeling that the refugees or the vulnerable populations that you're looking to help are not in a location, or the infrastructure or the legal system isn't there to protect them from malicious use of your technology, you don't want to build something beneficiary facing. And that's really, really vital. Like when we talk about self-sovereign identity, or we talk about being able to use the blockchain to unlock your identity and cross borders with it, if applying a self-sovereign identity system into South Sudan or Somalia is going to cause more harm than it is good. And remembering that and going through the process, and when you think about this technology, saying, okay, we're going to build this for this location, who are the malicious actors in the system? How are they going to hijack it? How are they going to use it for evil? Having that understanding of your own technology is really vital to understanding if you should actually build this. And it's also important to remember that what you're building, it can be really impactful without ever touching the beneficiaries. So I mean, like, speaking about building blocks, it's my understanding that nothing in the refugees' lives has changed at all.
Nothing, yeah.
There are no UX problems, no design problems. Their lives are just getting, the same process that they were. It's just more effective, more efficient, and the World Food Program is able to deliver more aid. Technology can be used to increase the efficiency in current systems. Blockchain is very good at that. We don't have to force it onto people who will endanger.
So I think two of the favorite words for most entrepreneurs is blue sky. What are some blue sky or unexplored opportunities that you think there are in this space of blockchain being used for social impact?
One of the most difficult challenges all of us face in the realm of social impact is actually impact metrics, being able to account for the change that we claim. And yeah, that starts with good theory of change type stuff and everything, but it really comes down to having data that you can claim has been a result of your intervention. And I think blockchain is a new opportunity for us to link up actual outcomes on the blockchain and close the circle right back to the very people who funded things, because now we can do that with the blockchain. We can trace whether it be a dollar donation or a $100 million donation. We can actually code that and track it right to the place, the locality, the organization that received it, and throughout the entire system, no matter how many hands it changed. Now the next step, the blue sky thinking, is to link that up to actual transformation, the impact metric that we decide in whatever intervention, and to be able to show that your $1 donation or your $100 donation actually resulted in this impactful change. And it's an immutable claim that you can carry with you as an organization or as someone who has donated money.
So for verification purposes of the donor, yeah.
I would think actually elections in corrupt governments would be a really interesting use case for blockchain. Could give transparency and give the individual a voice in to what has been a long challenge in terms of corrupt elections for a long time. Specifically in Zimbabwe, it was a place I really wanted to really test and see whether that could be a use case. But then I don't know how you could start that work. But I guess one step at a time.
I mean, we're obviously not there yet with blockchain, but the anonymous factor, being able to protect people's identities while delivering incentive mechanisms for them to, start reporting on malicious or negative voting actions. That's a huge opportunity. Of course, the technology has to be there in order for us to do that, and it's really important with as we talk about blue sky for the technology, like where can we go? That is seated in an understanding of what we can currently do. Ethereum is still a beta technology. Like it's not ready for widespread public adoption. We're getting there, and a lot of that blue sky will arise as more people come into the space, and we start to see an influx of innovative new ideas and people from different sectors to come and say, "Oh, we understand this problem." I can talk to something that I spoke a bit about this morning with Joe, which is the ability to rapidly disseminate information. When you start to tie things like blockchain and IoT sensors together, on the ground, you have across conflict zones all over the world, there are IoT sensors that can, they pick up on movements of vehicles, planes, troops, whatever, and they're able to actually alert civilians in the path of that malicious action to have them get out of the way. And 6 months ago, if someone had come to me and said, "Oh yeah, but like, how can we use blockchain to make this better?" I would have been like, I'm not super sure. But now having talked to people who work with IoT and understand what they do and kind of learning from different technologies, we now pretty close, we think, to being able to like rapidly disseminate what amounts to live information of atrocities. So you can start to prevent them. You can start to find the malicious actors much quicker. And that type of thinking, those new ways of interacting with other technologies, is something that's only going to expand the horizon for blockchain.
No, and it's actually very interesting. So one of the use cases that we're exploring right now is supply chain tracking, like bill of lading from one country to the next. You could also tie it in with IoT tracking of has a container been opened, yes or no, and like that type of stuff. Also very interesting other use case is thinking about it's already being done, like when you think about fair trade or tea, or like where is the food coming from, and tracing it from the source to where you're actually consuming it, and which steps has it actually taken on the way to you as a consumer in the end. And I think the identity space is also a very interesting one, in particular when you're thinking about, okay, how can you actually provide it? There's a kind of a functional identity that a lot of people actually need in terms of, as an international aid organization, we need to know who we provide assistance to. So it's kind of a necessity of the job. But there's also, I mean, even for like, if you think about refugees or like people who are being displaced, there is a need for them. You know, there's this blue sky thing of like, could people even have other access to proving who they are, or access to their all their university transcripts or whatever it is. Obviously, it's nothing that will just fall off, you know, from the sky, and like somebody has an idea and hacks it over a weekend. I mean, there's lots of stakeholders you have to actually bring across the journey. I mean, let's face it, right now, when you have a passport, it's a monopoly by government. So now, it's assuming that the government will say, hey, now there's a new company that's now saying, I'm replacing you as the government. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
But yeah, it seems like you were talking about the elections, that it's there, that it can be a source of providing trust to populations, as well as the businesses or organizations like World Food Program, to really build a stronger future. Yeah.
I really love what you said in terms of you need to be still, though, focused on the problem area and do that in collaboration, because you can't just bring the tech to bring the tech, and there's a lot of talk around blockchain right now. And an important factor of doing so is that you need to actively do work. You just can't continue to talk about it. But you need to get the opportunity to work in collaboration with so many different actors and organizations that need to merge together to understand what's the really good use case for it, and do that as a step-by-step process, but really take that step forward, because if not, we will never know.
And then, one of the last questions I have here, and I'm not sure, we're not doing like questions from the audience or anything like that, right? Are we? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. Awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway, do you have any final recommendations as it relates to using blockchain for social impact that entrepreneurs should keep in mind?
I mean, as I'm running an accelerator, and we have people who are excited and either coming from the social impact space or from developing countries, or traditional entrepreneurs that say, I don't want to do something more meaningful with my life. The one advice that I can give people is, really think about, first of all, how much do you understand about the problem? Get together with people who actually understand the problem space more. And it's like, you were referring to that, like, also think about, are you in that for, like, is this something that you want to pursue as a passion or as a business or something? And it doesn't have to be all non-profit. I mean, it can be, if you can build something that does well, and you can still do good by doing that, right? And this is just a question for you then. If you want to start something in like social good blockchain space, are you willing to actually pursue this, or is this just something like a hobby, right? And I think if you're really thinking, well, this can transform the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, then by all means go for it.
Keep that purpose and profit in mind. That the two can coexist. Yeah.
I just want to pick up on that, because I think it's really important that you actually start thinking about economics and nonprofits in a different way, because there's a huge funding gap for the sector, and that needs to be tapped into. So you need to look at how can you actually look at this differently, and how can funds and businesses be sustainable so they're not dependent on profit or funding from another actor. And specifically, then you also need to look at the ethical requirements of these companies. So I would love just the empowerment of self-growth and independency for people in that sector, specifically in the development world, that they can build that like economy upwards and the infrastructure upwards as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in on what Nick said earlier about problems. If you're looking to be a social entrepreneur or you're looking to build something with blockchain and social impact, you don't start with the technology, you start with the problem. Please don't force blockchain onto a problem that doesn't need it. It's just a waste of everything. And
Never heard of that before.
but really start, take a deep dive into understanding the problem you're trying to solve. Once you do that, you will be able to, blockchain actually will be effective. It will help. Don't spend 6 months of your life building a blockchain solution and then trying to force it onto a problem and be like, oh man, this is totally square and this is a circular problem. It's not going to fit. Take that 6 months, 5 months, whatever it takes to understand the problem, the society, the place you want to implement this solution, and make the decision about what piece of technology to use after you understand what's actually going to be effective.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because I think it's really important as an entrepreneur. It's all about knowing where your inspiration and drive come from, but that also needs to come with respect and humility for the space you're working into. And I see a lot of actors just driving forward no matter what they're doing, and that's not the way it works. And even the different startups in the space, they need to look and be open to each other and collaborate and think that's actually what decentralized technology should be about as well, building collaboration, which I think is super important.
One thing I'm really fascinated by is, on one hand, we have the incredible potential for blockchain and other technologies to entirely disrupt our social systems as we know them right now, and create whole new realities, ideally ones that truly solve the world's biggest challenges in a more fair and just way. Great, I'm all into that. At the same time, disruption for disruption's sake is probably not a very wise move. So one of the challenges for people who are working in this incredibly powerful technology, blockchain, is to be aware of the social systems that are going to be disrupted by your innovation. And it is your responsibility. It's not just somebody else's. It is your responsibility to be part of that discussion of who's going to be affected by this, what social systems are going to be affected, and what social systems actually should be strengthened. And not create technology just as, we screw that regulation, screw that institution. They're inefficient anyways. That's not the way the real world works. And many organizations find out the hard way many years later. They probably should have started it with a more nuanced understanding of the entrenched social interests. Some of that needs to be disrupted. Some of that needs to be strengthened. I don't have the exact answer for you, but anyone in this space should be thinking about that. And that's not just somebody else's problem.
That's a really good point. So do we have questions? Any questions in the audience? Yeah?
So it sounds like each of you have a pretty specific vision for how blockchain could cause social impact. What are the biggest barriers you see to that happening, say, tomorrow or in the near future? And what type of timescale do you see for those things materializing in their full impact?
I mean, I would say one of the key aspects, you have to have great ideas and innovations, but you also have to have a great team. And right now, I don't think it's, yes, your idea is, innovation always has to be really good, but in reality, a lot of the startups and the ideas pivot and you change over time. So I think it's actually more relevant. How do you have a strong team that's balanced also across different skill sets? So it doesn't help you if you have 3 tech co-founders who build blockchain technology. You also need to have, the business person, someone who actually can work with the communities. So, for instance.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that because I think our biggest challenge is also bureaucracy in the system, being being super patient about, we're not actually looking to disrupt any space, we're also looking to innovate the process for them as a part of it. That's also looking at their system and how the ownership of data information for any displaced person should also be valuable to them and should be carrying in the way they're traveling. So having patience there, I think it comes back to humility as well. But most importantly, patience is key. This is a marathon to build a company, and you need great people alongside with you. But the ethics of what you do also needs to always be aligned with the heart and mission and drive of the company.
And a little bit more on the implementation side. A huge barrier to overcome is the fact that a lot of the places we're talking about deploying much of this technology are the places with no or little to no infrastructure. And that is problematic, specifically what we're trying to do. I think we, as a blockchain space, have spent a lot of time thinking about protocol and use cases and development, and not a lot of time about, okay, what hardware do we need on the ground to actually deploy this? Like, how can we make localized access to blockchains? How can we use mesh networks? How can we use cell service, towers, whatever it is? And I think a big part of what we can do to overcome that is, if we're in a position of, a position of influence or a possibility where we can start to empower people on the technology, reminding them that, yeah, your protocol is awesome, but no one can use it if they don't have access to internet or they don't have access to a mesh network. How do we start to engage with the people building the hardware and have an understanding of blockchain and put that into the hardware that's going to be deployed on the ground? A lot of the solutions you're seeing now in the social impact space of blockchain are done in very controlled environments. They're large organizations that have a mandate to do that, and that makes it accessible, that makes it feasible. It's not feasible in places like, in rural Nigeria where no one has access. Like, yeah, they talk about there being 70% phone penetration in Nigeria. The people who most need the help are the people who don't have the phones. And they don't have localized access. And a lot of the time, if you're looking to influence something, the people who control internet access in that region, or they control the cell towers, are the people you're trying to disrupt. Those are the corrupt actors. So I just think it's vital that we focus on accessibility to the technology as well as developing use cases and protocol.
Well, conversely to that, isn't it, you have opportunities as well from that, seeing that, I think roughly, this is more broadly speaking, but I think 70% of venture capital spending in Africa in the last year was related to fintech.
Yeah, it was.
So you got both sides, those serious challenges and then some opportunities. Yeah.
I think, yeah, sorry.
If I can just add on to what Ben was saying, I think one aspect, and this comes back to understanding the problem and the local communities. What we're seeing right now as well is that in a lot of even remote places, as long as you have connectivity, maybe there's a young person who has a smartphone and becomes an entrepreneur by providing smartphone services with that smartphone to the rest of the community, which is with smallholder farmers and others. So you do have to think about, okay, what is actually your process look like? And you can make lots of things happen. It's just that you can't assume that everybody owns the latest smartphone with all the bells and whistles that you have in developed countries.
Yeah, exactly. And they share, which he would actually share his network with the rest of the family as well, right? I think, but then at the same time, there's no use case in the same way for blockchain in Norway, where I come from, because you already have trust in the government, right? So it's a really important factor. That's exactly why it's such a really interesting and impactful way that you can solve real challenges. But you need to start somewhere. So I think it's cool.
Yep. Just wanted to ask you guys, what's the role of grant funding in the space? When is it actually helpful, and when is it possibly hindering, innovation and hindering organizations that might be doing good work? Are we tipping the scales?
I can pick up on that, being from Norway and having Innovation Norway start funding UN Women to do their first blockchain initiative. I think that's actually been such an important factor for UN Women to even do this, because they then need the funding, and it's less challenging to go one step at a time. We don't need to take funding from somewhere else, because that's always the challenge of any humanitarian organization, because that money should be provided for something else and a really important problem, right? And then that's where I say I'm actually really proud of what Norway is pushing out and being really proactive in that space and offering the money to do the research work that needs to be done. But the other part of it is just that that grant cannot be just another excuse to work with a startup and just have money for a specific amount that you want to do. It should be focused on the challenge that you're looking to solve.
Yeah, and as an accelerator, we are also right now, we are grant funded, and we are also, when we're working with startups right now, we are giving startups cash for 0% equity. We don't actually require them to necessarily just open source everything as well. It's one of the things that we actually want for startups is to have a sustainable business model at some point. And yes, you may not always be profitable from day one. That's completely unrealistic. But you do need to look for this kind of how is this ever going to be sustainable. So even if it's grant funding, I would argue, well, it should be smart money. So giving the money to startups, teams, innovations that are most likely having the most impact potential. So, and I think so. It's probably the selection mechanism of how the grants are being allocated to different innovations that have to be looked at.
I would also add, like, if it's grants, they come with less pressure. So you have the actual time and space to do the work that you need to do instead of having investors maybe directing you to a specific way you shouldn't go, and it's not right for you at that time and space. And that's why these grants is also really, really important as it.
I would just say that grant funding is hugely important in this space, especially for startups, just to get their concept out there. They shouldn't be designed to Bernard's point, they should have sustainable business models of some kind. But the funding is really important, but you have some leverage as well that you can, system-wide, let me restate this. You have leverage to make sure that the grant given to a startup will have system-level implications by insisting on a few things, such as open source and such as feeding their lessons learned into a larger network. Because it's not just one startup. I assume if you're a grant, you're not just interested in that one startup. You're interested in what lessons are they learning that can be applied to anybody else in this space as well. And making sure that information truly gets out there in a global perspective to all different socioeconomic groups of innovators who are in this space, not just the same ones who tend to be speaking in a bubble. And that's the challenge I started off saying. We need to pop that bubble and think very differently about the democratization of technology, meaning anybody anywhere can be a driver of their innovation.
So we have 5 more minutes. If anyone wants to question.
I have a question specifically for Bernard. The World Food Program, we've talked a lot. There's been a lot of good conversation about focusing on problems. And I'm curious, when you think about the organization as a whole, what are like the top 3 things that you guys are focusing on from a problem perspective that maybe technologists can think about and see if blockchain is useful, maybe it's not?
So I'm a big fan of design thinking and lean startups. So I actually really believe it has to be problems, but you also actually have to have the team. So as an accelerator, what we're doing is we're looking for startups and internal innovators that actually want to push things forward. Like, ideas are cheap, so it's actually really easy to come up with, well, I think that's a big problem. Like, there's a couple of things that obviously will transform how ending hunger is possible, and that includes, for instance, like how cash transfers or e-vouchers are being transformed towards people. So, like, how can you make the next step change in efficiency, in transparency, in accountability in doing that? There's other areas. One of the relevance for us is, for instance, in emergency assistance. How can we be much more efficient using artificial intelligence, using blockchain, drones, remote sensing for finding out where are hungry people, and, like, let's say after a hurricane, how can we actually direct the aid there? And if you think about how, I mean, in my case now, ending hunger, think about all the other tech, food tech innovations that are happening right now, CRISPR, Cas, other things. Like, there's lots of things that are happening, and it's really exciting times that you can think about. All of these developments are happening right now. We don't actually know which of those will be successful, but there's, I'm sure, if we will be hopefully still seeing, like, in the next couple of decades, that we actually have a world without hunger, and so that's what we're working on.
I hope it's sooner.
I mean, it's SDG number 2, it's 2030, so, like, zero hunger.
I would say also, like, I find it interesting to see, like, what do you think about economy and what is money? And because in reality, money is like what is value to you and what is value to me, and then we do that exchange. And there I find that to be really interesting, because maybe the technology isn't secure enough to have the liquidity of, like, a cryptocurrency or something like that yet, but moving to the future, step-by-step process, that is easy to implement it as a part of the solution.
Yeah, and I would. How much can I tip my hat here? In the context of problems for humanitarian organizations, at least as someone who works with humanitarian organizations, I gonna go to Thea's point about bureaucracy and internal efficiency. I'm sorry, Bernard.
That's okay.
I think what we have is and I alluded to this earlier when you were talking about building technology that is impactful without necessarily touching the beneficiaries directly. We know that blockchain is very good at creating internal efficiencies and cutting down on administrative overhang. So how can we help an organization like the World Food Program reduce a lot of the funds that they're spending, not going to say misusing, that they are spending on administrative overhang, or that's kind of just lost to drippage throughout the system? That's an awesome use case and one that will be super impactful for us. There might be some bureaucracy to fight through to get there. But I think that that's something that we as technologists need to prove. We need to be able to look at an organization like the WFP and say, hey, like, we're here to make you guys do your job better. And we're going to help you with that.
And it doesn't. I wouldn't approach it necessarily from, well, there's bureaucracy and this is that. You need, again, thinking about the problem, like why does an organization, or why do startups exist? It's like, in our case, it's to save lives in emergencies and then changing lives of people, actually lifting them out of hunger sustainably. Now, starting from there and really reimagining how we're doing that through new business models, new technologies, and because I think that's also some of the most successful things that we've seen were, for instance, selling airtight silos to smallholder farmers. For decades, people have tried to give them away for free, and so a colleague of ours, he came up with the idea saying, well, we just sell them, produce them locally in Uganda, and we sell them through an NGO, a private sector company, and a startup. And in the first year, they sold 70,000 of those. In the last 3 years, they sold 250,000 of those. And not giving them away for free, but selling them. And this is really interesting because just a completely different mantra. And this is where also a lot of these questions for rethinking social context, because it was fit for purpose for the communities, right?
I think I can pick up on that because I've been trying to sell that exact business case for non-governmentals as our first business model, basically. Okay. Their time efficiency in their education courses and how that can actually, the administration costs could be cut. What I find really important is that World Food Program and UNICEF Innovation, which is the two organizations I know is much forefront in actually pushing this forward, that they do that and they lead that way because it gives them inspirations to other organizations to take that step. So if you can do what UNICEF and World Food Program does, taking early stage companies to give them the research opportunity for funding and get that on the ground, it gives opportunity for also the local organizations, and even down in Norway, to say, oh, okay, we can do this now, one step at a time. And that brings a really important mentality into the space.
Just one comment on that. We also, because we have this opportunity to rethink the way humanitarian aid has been distributed over time, on one hand, I agree with you about the inefficient. We're picking on the World Food Program here, Bernard, sorry. Having worked for WFP as a staff member for many years, I can also relate to that. There's one issue about improving the inefficiencies of the bureaucracy. Yes, there's an opportunity there. But we also have an opportunity to rethink whether or not those bureaucracies have any role in humanitarian assistance, especially if they're trying to do what other people can do, i.e. frontline community-based organizations that really what they need is just direct financing. They don't need layer after layer after layer of middle people between them and money for them to be able to act very quickly in a humanitarian disaster, because they are the frontline actors, particularly if we talk about the disaster space. So I think we have an opportunity here to actually think outside the normal aid system, which, like it or not, is a giant profession and business entity in and of itself, for the good and bad of it, but it is there. But to think now outside of that and moving money directly to the frontline actors, because we can now with blockchain. The startup I'm going to launch, Perpoco, is a community-based financing blockchain-empowered platform which will move money directly to community-based organizations, bypassing all the UN, international, and national NGOs, and getting right to the communities and empowering them with that money, and then holding them accountable and incentivizing them for success. We can think differently about the way we've done humanitarian assistance in the past now, and blockchain is allowing us to think differently because of all of its decentralized properties.
Seems like a great place to stop. Thank you to the panel. Thanks for everyone coming. Round of applause.